My future wife's friends called me a practice husband. Behind my back, so I left her at the venue and took the honeymoon solo. I'm a 30-year-old guy, and I genuinely thought I'd found my forever person. Her name was Ambitious, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make every conversation bend toward her. From the moment I met her, something inside me quieted. I'd come out of a brutal breakup a year before, one that left me convinced. I wasn't built for love, but Sarah made me believe again. She didn't just see the version of me that smiled in public. She asked about the scars beneath it. Or at least, I thought she did. We met at a friend's birthday dinner. Her laughter carried over the noise like music I couldn't ignore. She teased me about being too serious for a guy with kind eyes, and by the end of the night, I was hooked. Our relationship moved fast. Weekend trips, deep talks about the future, spontaneous dates that felt like scenes from a movie. When she said yes to my proposal under a string of fairy lights at our favorite restaurant, she cried so hard I thought I'd never stop smiling. Everyone said we were that couple, the ones who made love look effortless. Planning the wedding felt like living in a dream. We'd stay up at midnight scrolling through Pinterest boards, arguing playfully over colors and songs. She'd fall asleep with her head on my chest, mumbling about how she couldn't wait to be Mrs. Thompson. I remember thinking, this is what peace feels like. If someone had told me back then that I'd be the groom standing alone at my own wedding, I would have laughed. Because back then, I still believed love meant trust. I had no idea how quickly that belief would shatter, or how far betrayal could reach when it came dressed as affection. The first time I met Sarah's friends, I wanted to impress them. They were her ride-or-die circle Jessica, Lauren, and Kayla, the kind of women who looked like they'd stepped out of a lifestyle blog. They had that polished, confident energy that made you feel like you had to prove yourself just to sit at the same table. Sarah adored them, and I figured if they were important to her, they'd be important to me too. At first, everything seemed fine. They laughed at my jokes, asked questions about my job, even toasted to our engagement. But somewhere between the champagne and the laughter, I started noticing small jabs buried in their charm. When I mentioned I worked in accounting, Jessica smirked and said, "At least Sarah will always have someone to balance the bills." Everyone laughed, including Sarah. I laughed too, pretending it didn't sting. Another time, Lauren asked, "So, do you ever get bored doing spreadsheets all day?" I tried to joke back, but Sarah's silence was louder than the laughter. She didn't defend me. She didn't say anything. It was as if my worth was something to be quietly measured and mocked. All in good fun, later that night, I told her it bothered me. She rolled her eyes and said, "Babe, that's just how they are. They tease everyone. Don't be so sensitive." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't caring. Either it was dismissive. And that word, sensitive, stuck with me. From then on, I noticed more how she lit up when they complimented her ring, how she changed her tone around them, how my presence felt like an accessory rather than a partner. I told myself it was just wedding stress, that every couple had rough edges. But deep down, a quiet unease began for me, a small, persistent voice whispering that something about this friendship, about us, wasn't as harmless as it looked. As wedding planning moved forward, the tiny jabs started piling up. What I thought were harmless quirks began to feel like a pattern that cut deeper than I expected. One evening, we were picking flowers for the ceremony when Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, smiled, and said, "Jessica says the venue should be pink. She thinks any other color is so boring." I tried to shrug it off, saying, "I thought we liked lavender." She laughed, but it wasn't warm. It was that sharp, knowing laugh that stung. "Honey, they have better taste," she said. At dinner later, I overheard Lauren whispering, "He's so vanilla." My chest tightened, and I felt heat creeping up my neck, but I forced a laugh. "Vanilla, really?" I joked, hoping to diffuse the embarrassment. Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're just too safe for us to fully get you," she said, echoing their words. That was the moment I realized I wasn't being teased. I was being sized up, measured, and found lacking. The thing that hurt most was the silence of her defense. I remember the taste of bitter coffee as I stared at my cup, imagining a version of Sarah who might have stood up for me, who might have said, "Enough." But that version didn't exist here. Instead, I felt myself shrinking, walking on eggshells, questioning whether I was overreacting or if this was my life unraveling in slow motion. It didn't help that everywhere I went, their approval or disapproval seemed to orbit around her happiness. Even my jokes, my stories, the way I tried to share my world, felt filtered through their lens. I started noticing how her laughter changed depending on what they said, how she mirrored their moods, how I slowly became an afterthought in the life we were supposedly building together. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, heart racing, questioning if I'd imagined the sting or if my future wife had already decided who mattered more. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. A few weeks before the wedding, Sarah insisted I join her for a casual dinner with her coworkers. I hesitated. I wasn't the most social guy, but I wanted to keep the peace. Everything seemed normal at first. We laughed over shared plates, swapped stories, and I tried to keep up with the rapid-fire humor around the table. Then, a coworker, clearly a little too tipsy, leaned over and muttered something that froze me mid-bite. Man, I didn't know Sarah was marrying her practice husband. I laughed awkwardly, thinking maybe I misheard. Practice husband? I asked, forcing a smile. He shrugged, smirking. You know, someone to warm her up before she lands the real deal. My stomach dropped like a stone. I caught Sarah's eye, hoping she'd give me a reassuring glance, maybe even an apology for the offhand comment. Instead, she smiled too brightly, almost nervously, and said, "Oh, don't mind him, he's drunk." But the words lingered, echoing in my head. Later, I confronted her gently, trying to understand. "Sarah, did you hear what he just said?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She looked down at her plate, tapped her fork, and said, "It's just a dumb joke. Seriously, don't make a big deal out of it." Her dismissal cut deeper than any insult could. "Don't make a big deal out of it," I whispered, gripping my glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. I left that dinner feeling a strange mix of humiliation and disbelief. This wasn't playful teasing. This wasn't harmless. I realized for the first time that the people she surrounded herself with might not see me as a partner. At all, they saw me as a placeholder, a stepping stone, a practice. That night, I lay awake, the ceiling fan worry above me, replaying the words over and over. The taste of bitter regret lingered in my mouth, and for the first time, I felt a seed of doubt grow in my chest. Maybe I hadn't been truly seen in this relationship at all, and if I wasn't careful, I was about to be made the fool in the biggest moment of my life. As the wedding drew nearer, Sarah changed. At first, I chalked it up to stress, but it was more than that. There was a coldness creeping into her eyes, a distance I couldn't ignore. She spent hours on calls with her friends, scrolling through Pinterest boards, obsessing over details I didn't care about. I suggested small, simple touches. Maybe we don't need the golden chandeliers in every room. And she'd smile thinly, brushing me off. Trust me, everything has to be perfect. But it wasn't just about perfection. It was about impressing them, about performing for her circle while I faded into the background. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation she thought I wouldn't hear. Her phone was on speaker as she walked past the living room. "Yeah, he's fine, I guess, but you know, he's so predictable. Not exactly exciting." The words cut deeper than any argument we'd had. Her laugh joined "there's a light," airy sound that didn't belong to my end. I felt a familiar sinking in my chest, the one that told me I wasn't just overlooked, I was openly mocked. I tried to bring it up later, sitting on the couch, my hands shaking slightly as I asked, "Sarah, do you even see me? Or am I just here?" She shrugged, a small smile twisting her lips. "You're overthinking this, babe. You know I love you." But the warmth was gone. The love I felt was unbalanced, shadowed by her allegiance to their approval. Days blurred together. Fittings, tastings, last-minute calls, and I felt myself shrinking. Every compliment from her friends felt like a judgment against me. Every laugh I wasn't in on a silent indictment. Even her mother noticed the change, asking me quietly if I was nervous. But I couldn't voice the truth. I was terrified that the woman I loved, the woman I'd trusted with my life, had already decided where her loyalties lay. That night, lying awake in our shared apartment, I stared at the ceiling and felt an emptiness growing, like a storm quietly building overhead. I had to decide whether to ignore it or whether this engagement, this dream we were planning, was already a house of cards waiting to collapse. It happened a week before the wedding, completely by accident. I was scrolling through my phone when a new voice memo appeared in my messages. I didn't recognize the sender at first, but curiosity got the better of me. I pressed play, and within seconds, my world tilted sideways. The voices of Jessica, Lauren, and Kayla filled my ears, laughing loudly. I froze as I heard them call me the practice husband, mocking my income, my job, even the way I walked. My heart sank, every laugh hitting like a punch to the gut. And then, the unthinkable Sarah's voice joined in, light and airy, agreeing with them. "He's perfect practice for being a husband," she said, "just not for forever." The warmth I thought existed between us was gone. She wasn't defending me. She was laughing at me with them. I replayed it again and again, trying to convince myself it was a joke, that I had misheard. But every word was sharp and deliberate, every chuckle echoing my humiliation. My hands trembled as I saved the memo, unsure if I wanted to confront her or just disappear. That night, I sat in our apartment, staring blankly at the dim city lights outside the window. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, sweet and ironic, mocking the betrayal that had just been delivered through a recording. I felt rage, disbelief, and a cold, heavy clarity. Things were not how I had imagined. The engagement, the perfect wedding, the laughter we shared it was all a carefully curated illusion. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't yell or cry. I just sat in silence, feeling the walls close in, realizing that if I went through with the wedding, I'd be committing to a life built on lies and mockery. And yet, the wedding was just days away, leaving me with a choice I didn't know I was ready to make. The days leading up to the wedding were surreal, like I was moving through a dream I couldn't wake up from. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Rehearsal dinners, last-minute flower arrangements, seating charts that no longer mattered to MIT was all a performance I had to play perfectly. I smiled, I nodded, I laughed at jokes, but behind my eyes, a storm was brewing. Every time I caught Sarah's reflection in a mirror, I saw the same woman I loved, and yet a stranger. I watched her interact with her friends, the way her laughter lit up at their approval, the way her eyes danced when they complimented her dress or teased me. I remembered the voice memo, her betrayal, and I felt a strange sense of detachment. I realized I had two choices: stay and be humiliated on the biggest day of my life, or find a way to take control of the story before it ruined me completely. That night, after the final rehearsal, I walked alone through the empty banquet hall. The scent of fresh flowers and polished wood filled the air, but it felt hollow, almost mocking. I touched the edge of the wedding arch, imagining Sarah walking down the aisle, unaware that I already knew the truth. The quiet hum of the air conditioning mixed with the echo of my footsteps, and in that silence, clarity struck me like lightning. I didn't have to participate in this charade. I packed a small bag, checking and rechecking it, my hands steady despite the knot in my stomach. I wasn't planning to yell, to fight, or to plead. I would let the day go on without me. It wasn't revenge, yet it was survival. A quiet assertion that I wasn't a prop in someone else's fantasy. As I zipped the bag, I looked around the empty hall, the soft glow of fairy lights catching on crystal chandeliers, and I felt a strange mix of fear and liberation. Tomorrow, everyone would expect me to be the perfect groom, but I had already decided that the role was over. The morning of the wedding, everything felt heavy, almost unreal. I woke early, dressed in my tuxedo, tying the bow tie with hands that didn't shake but felt icy. The sunlight streamed through the blinds, illuminating the neatly arranged boutonniere. On my lapel symbol of a day I no longer wanted to live. Guests were arriving downstairs, laughter and chatter drifting up the staircase, unaware that the man they expected at the altar had already made a decision. I grabbed my phone and typed one final message, attaching the voice memo that had haunted me for days. "I hope the next husband isn't just practice," I wrote, pressing send to Sarah and a few key people in her circle. I paused for a moment, looking at my reflection in the mirror. There was no anger, no tears, just calm. A strange clarity that felt like liberation. Then I left, quietly. I didn't slip out of the limo or sneak past anyone. I simply walked through the front doors, leaving the chaos behind. Outside, the city felt alive in a way the wedding hall never could. The wind carried the scent of blooming jasmine, and the street noises a honking taxi, distant laughter felt grounding. For the first time in weeks, I breathed without the weight of judgment pressing down on me. Back at the venue, I could imagine the panic unfolding, the bridesmaids frantic, her mother pleading, Sarah standing frozen at the altar, surrounded by guests, realizing that the man she thought she could mock and manipulate had taken control of the story. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt peace. I drove to the airport, suitcase in the trunk, boarding pass in hand, heart steady. My honeymoon had been paid 4 months ago, and now I would go alone. Alone, but free. Alone, but finally unshackled from a life that wasn't mine. And as the plane lifted off, I couldn't help but wonder how long it would take her to understand what she had lost, and if she ever would. Landing in the Maldives alone felt surreal, almost cinematic. The humidity hit me first, warm and thick, carrying the scent of salt and blooming frangipani. The resort staff greeted me with cheerful smiles, unaware that I wasn't a couple, just a single man walking into paradise with a heavy heart and a quiet sense of victory. My room overlooked the turquoise water, waves lapping softly against the white sand, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I spent the morning walking barefoot along the shore, the sand soft between my toes, letting the water lap at my ankles. Each wave carried away a little bit of the anxiety, the humiliation, and the lingering betrayal. I thought about Sarah, about her laughter, about the voice memo, about the day I left her at the altar. The sting was still there, but it was muted by clarity. I didn't need her validation anymore. I didn't need the approval of her friends or anyone else. Days passed in a blur of solitary bliss. I swam, I read, I watched sunsets that painted the sky in impossible shades of orange and pink. I ate fresh seafood at little beachside tables, feeling the warmth of the sun on my back and the hum of life around me. Calls and messages flooded in from family, mutual friends, even Sarah herself, but I ignored most of them. The world could wait. This was my time to heal, to reclaim my life from the mockery and manipulation I'd endured. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and painted the ocean gold, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, listening to the gentle roar of the waves. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace, not hollow or temporary, but solid, grounding, real. I smiled, knowing I had chosen myself over someone who couldn't value me, and in that choice, I found strength I hadn't realized I possessed. While I was floating in the turquoise waters of the Maldives, chaos was unfolding back home. My phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications, messages piling up from family, mutual friends, even distant acquaintances who had somehow heard. The voice memo I had sent in my final message had leaked beyond the original circle. And suddenly, the truth of Sarah's betrayal was out in the open. People were shocked, some horrified, others whispering behind screens, sharing screenshots and gossip like wildfire. Social media became a battlefield. Her friends scrambled to control the narrative, posting vague quotes about trust issues and unexpected heartbreak, but it was too late. The recording spoke for itself, and anyone listening could hear her laughter, her complicity. Even her mother, who had adored me, called my voicemail in tears, apologizing for not seeing the signs herself. It was surreal to realize that the humiliation Sarah had thought she could dodge was now hers entirely. I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything. I watched from thousands of miles away as the carefully curated image she had projected for months crumbled. Her coworkers whispered in hallways. Bridesmaids argued about whether they should have said something. People realized that the perfect bride had been complicit in mocking the man she claimed to love. And in the quiet of my hotel room, the irony wasn't lost on me. I had left, alone and calm. While the storm consumed her, the most satisfying part wasn't revenge, it was justice unfolding organically. I had no part in punishing her directly. I had simply refused to be a pawn in her charade, and the fallout followed naturally. For the first time, I felt untethered from the anxiety, the humiliation, the anticipation of her next move. I was free to breathe, free to reclaim my story, and free to start a new chapter on my terms. But even amid this calm, a whisper of unease lingered. How would this all end? Could she recover from the public shame? Or was this just the beginning of her own reckoning? Weeks later, Sarah tracked me down. She found my new apartment in the city, knocking on the door like a storm I hadn't expected to return. When I opened it, she looked disheveled, eyes red-rimmed, her perfect hair a little messy vulnerability written all over her face. "Please," she said, voice cracking, "we can fix this." I didn't know it would go that far. I studied her silently, letting her words hang in the air. The betrayal was too vivid, the echoes of that voice memo still fresh in my mind. "You didn't mean it?" I asked softly, almost whispering. "You laughed. You agreed. You let them call me a practice husband, and you joined in." The words weren't angry, they were calm, deliberate, heavy with finality. She tried to reach for my hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was joking. I swear, I love you." Her desperation felt real, but it was too late. The love I had felt was no longer mine to give freely. I took a step back, feeling the weight of every insult, every mockery, every subtle dismissal over the past months. "I've listened long enough," I said, voice steady. "You didn't need to mean it to," laughed. "And that's what matters. You chose them over me. He chose the mockery instead of trust." Her shoulders slumped, and she sank onto the step outside my door, silent for the first time. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. There was nothing left to salvage, and in that quiet, I felt a strange sense of power not over her, but over myself. I had finally reclaimed the narrative, taken my dignity back, and refused to be humiliated any longer. I closed the door gently behind me. Leaving her sitting there, realization etched on her face, she understood, finally, that the man she thought she could mock and control had walked away. And as I leaned against the wall in silence, I felt the first flicker of true closure. Months later, I finally let myself breathe. I'd moved to a new city, taken a new job, and slowly rebuilt a life free from the constant judgment and mockery that had followed me for months. Mornings were quiet, the sunlight spilling across my apartment floor, the aroma of fresh coffee filling the air. I didn't need to check my phone for notifications or worry about who had called or texted. I was finally untethered, and it felt strange and beautiful all at once. I thought about Sarah sometimes, briefly, not with anger, but with clarity. The betrayal had been sharp, a wound that left scars, but it had also shown me my worth. I didn't need validation from her, her friends, or anyone who had tried to belittle me. The voice memo, the wedding, the abandoned honeymoon, they were all reminders that my life didn't have to be dictated by people who didn't truly value me. Occasionally, I'd meet someone new, someone genuine, someone curious about the real me, but I moved slowly, cautiously, savoring the freedom I had fought to claim. I explored beaches, cafes, quiet parks, the simple pleasures I had neglected for the sake of a dream that had never been mine. Each step was deliberate, each breath grounding me in a life of my own making. One evening, I stood on a pier, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of gold and pink. I pulled out my phone and deleted the last photo of our engagement hand image of a moment that had felt perfect but was never mine to hold. And as the photo vanished, I smiled, not bitter, not vengeful, just free. For the first time in years, I felt whole. I had survived betrayal, walked away from humiliation, and reclaimed my story. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And in that piece, I finally understood the power of choosing yourself. Walking away and letting the past wash into the distance like the gentle waves at my feet.